welcome to this IMechE Talking Together interview. Today we're joined by the Head of Race Strategy at Mercedes-AMG Formula One team. You have myself, Minor Akhtar, and also Jordan Howarth, who are the hosts today. We're both engineers at Rolls-Royce and volunteer for the IMechE.
So yeah, Rosie, thank you so much for joining us today and coming here to effectively offer your unique perspective on the topic of mental health and how that reflects in your professional life. So I think before we get into that, I think a really important question to start with that everybody wants to know is your job is obviously very exciting, but also very busy. So with that in mind, what's a day-to-day life for you working as head of strategy in an F1 team?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard to describe a typical day, really. I've always said that as strategists, we almost wear two hats. Part of our time we're supporting events, and then it's all about, you know, it's just a cycle. You start with a load of analysis before you get to the event, trying to do all the prep, learn everything you can from the previous years, and then you get to the event, the kind of Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, which is like this crazy but really fun kind of 4 days of just, you know, actually getting to do what we do and do what everyone thinks we do the whole time, you know, of making those calls, either being the person on the pit wall making the calls or more likely being one of the big team back at the factory kind of supporting that, and then post race doing loads of analysis and making sure that we learn everything we can for next time. But that I would describe as only half our job, because we also develop a lot of the tools that we use. So the other half of the time I would describe myself more as somewhere between a software engineer and a data scientist, you know, where I'm writing code, doing analysis, and that's one of the really exciting things, because we are continuously developing tools. We're developing tools that we get to use, and we're developing tools so that in like 5 races time, the way we do strategy doesn't look the same as the way we do it, you know, right now. So that's what makes it pretty exciting as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, that's really good. So I think day to day almost wasn't a fair question. It's almost like a cycle through weeks. That's really good. So you said you were in motorsport, or you've been in F1 for 15 years now?
I think this is my 14th year involved.
14th year. Awesome.
2008 was the first year I was involved in Formula One.
Wow. So throughout those 14 years, do you think that the motorsport industry and the topic of mental health has changed in the approach towards it and view of it during that time frame?
Yeah, massively. I mean, I'll always remember a kind of joke that was not, you know, half a joke at my first team, where they said, yeah, we have flexi time. The core hours are Monday to Friday, 8 till 6, but you're welcome to start as early as you want, finish as late as you want. You know, it was very much a kind of, you know, uncompromising, just, yeah, one of those industries you'd say maybe a bit like banking or something, where you give your life to it. And no one really spoke about the topics of mental health or that side of things. Now I think there's still a way to go, but things are much better. I would say that we've got a much better understanding of how to get the best out of people and how to look after people, and the idea that if you just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, at some point you're going to burn out, and that's going to happen probably much sooner than you realize, and the impact is pretty big. So for us, particularly with the calendar growing so much year on year, my team have got much more careful about making sure that we're managing our workloads through the year, making sure that we're taking that time out so that when we get to the next race, we're not exhausted. I mean, we're not there yet. Everyone was pretty relieved when we got to the end of Abu Dhabi and they could have a bit of time to, you know, breathe, and you still get that kind of holding on to the shutdown. But we're definitely going in the right direction, and I think the whole industry is starting to understand that it's about getting the most out of the people and the most output, not about the, you know, getting the most hours out of people. And then also just the importance of balancing other aspects of your life and making sure that you're happy and able to talk about these things, you know. I think the number of emails and conversations that I have around mental health and the tools we have for the team has ballooned in the last 3 or 4 years, and I'm hoping that that's going to keep moving. But then we also have to be honest, you know, it's a competition. It's a sport where you're trying to be better than your counterparts in the other team. So you're always kind of trying to sit on that line between pushing as hard as you can, but not too hard, and try and keep everyone on that just the right side of the okay line, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
So following on from what you said there, Rosie, just regarding how other people can handle mental health issues at work, and how you've noticed such an increase in the resources for other people that you work with. Motorsport obviously is regarded as quite an exciting job, but it can be really stressful at times. So you personally, do you have a specific routine or management strategy for when your personal life does become overwhelming and kind of counteracts with your professional life?
Yeah, well, I mean, I wouldn't say so much a routine. I've always tried to, I'm certainly not practicing what I preach right now, but I've always tried to incorporate things like exercise and stuff into my daily routine, because I always find that makes me a better, happier, more balanced person. Having an 18-month-old and juggling nursery drop-offs and stuff has made that tricky at the moment. But the other big thing, and probably I didn't approach it in the best way, but the best thing that could have happened to me is starting to become really open with my boss. And I don't think it has to be your boss, but having someone at work that you can talk to and who understands the kind of stresses and pressure you're under at work, but also being able to open up a bit about the other things that are going on in your life and stresses and pressure. For me, that was transformational, because then suddenly I had someone who got it, but got it from both aspects, you know. And I now have I've always had a great relationship with a lot of my colleagues, but I now have a very open relationship with a few colleagues, which means that when things are getting too much, I've got someone I can share that with and kind of help me work through, where do I find the balance? Where do I need to, you know, kind of maybe pull back and stop trying to do it all the time, you know? And that is what I found really helpful. The other thing for me is having a child. So in the past, one of the things I've always struggled with is blurring those boundaries between where work ends and the rest of my life starts, because there's always more to do. You are never going to have an empty to-do list. And so you could always stay for another hour, get a little bit more done, and hopefully, you know, put yourself above your counterpart at Red Bull or Ferrari or wherever. But at some point you have to draw that line. And I used to find that difficult, which would also lead, you know, to risks of burnout and such like. Now I've got a child, I've got these really rigid boundaries. I will be leaving work at exactly this time because I've got to go and pick him up from the nursery. And I thought that was going to be really kind of intrusive. And initially I was worried, you know, how well I'd be able to do my job given the fact that I can't now flex in the way that I used to. But actually, I think it's made me better at my job. I know exactly where the boundaries are. I don't have to stress about whether I should be staying a bit later, pushing a bit harder or whatever. But equally, when I'm at work, I'm super focused. You know, when I'm doing it, I know exactly I've got this long. It's a bit like, I don't know, revising for an exam or something. The deadline is immovable, and therefore you can just focus on doing absolutely the best you can with the space you've got available, and then being able to switch off the rest of the time.
As a female in the industry, so for me personally, being a female engineer, sometimes I notice that I'm like the only woman in the room, and you can be completely outnumbered by the amount of males that are there. So for me, I guess I've kind of experienced a little bit of imposter syndrome before, which is the feeling of not belonging in the room. So that can have an impact on your professional life and your mental health and well-being at any point in your career. So for you personally, have you ever experienced imposter syndrome, and how did you approach it if you did?
I mean, I wouldn't say I've ever really suffered with what I would call imposter syndrome. I think I've always been relatively confident that I've got the technical skills to be doing what I'm doing, and that technically I belong in the room, if that makes sense. But I've definitely experienced the kind of not necessarily feeling like you fit in 100%, and that you're not necessarily as comfortable in the room as other people. And particularly for me, that's around, like, you know, technically I don't struggle, but sometimes when it comes to presenting, you know, the first time I had to sit down in front of Toto or Lewis Hamilton and tell them, you know, what we should be doing, that's pretty daunting, because I know my stuff, but can I get it across to them? And particularly, can I get it across to these people who are busy, where I don't have much time, and they're not engineers, they're not interested in all of the data science and stuff that's gone into it, but they really know their stuff in a completely different field. So can I communicate my world to them well enough? That I found scary. I still don't think it's imposter syndrome, but it's scary. And I mean, I guess the way I've approached it, partly it's around making sure that you're in a supportive environment, you know, and I've always had colleagues that I can talk to that can help give me the reassurance, you know, that I belong there. It's also about practice, you know, the more you put yourself out there, the more you kind of stretch, I guess, what you're comfortable with, the more comfortable these things feel. And then I've also, every now and then you come across someone who's just not very welcoming, or perhaps doesn't think you belong in the room because of how you look, or what your gender is, or whatever. I think I've been lucky that they've always come across at points in my career where I'm very settled in my role, and I know that it's them that's wrong rather than me. But I think it's correct to say that they're probably always going to exist to some extent, and it's about not letting them take up too much of your headspace, and focusing on the people who matter and the opinions that matter to you. Yeah,
that's really good. So I think it's fair to say that both myself and Manor are in relatively early stages of our career. Manor's still on the apprenticeship scheme, and I've recently come off the graduate scheme. Sometimes in a developing engineer's career, there can be periods of uncertainty. Sometimes that's internal or external. I think a big one over the last few years, personally for me, was COVID. There was a point where Rolls-Royce having to make difficult decisions, and so the uncertainty of would there be a job for me at the end of it was something that wasn't totally clear from the beginning. So have you personally had any amounts of uncertainty or periods of uncertainty in your career? And were there any points where you had to make difficult decisions, or make decisions that would change either how you're approaching your job, or anything else from that aspect?
Yeah, massively. I mean, I think for me, I'm really not a planner. You know, like, I've never been the kind of person with a 5-year plan. I can never tell you what my career goals were or where I would want to be. And normally I'm pretty relaxed about that, and I see it as a bit of a strength. You know, I focus on what I enjoy and just see where life takes me. But then every now and then I'll have a massive bout of anxiety about, you know, what am I missing out on, and what am I just running myself into a dead end by not kind of looking further ahead and planning and knowing where stuff's going. And so it's almost like this kind of cycle of generally being quite chilled out, and then compensating for it by being very not chilled out. I would also really struggle to ask for kind of help and guidance. I'd worry about all the questions that someone might ask me that I don't have the answers to, rather than thinking about the things that they might be able to help with. And again, I guess a bit like what I was saying before, the more you put yourself out there, the easier it gets. So I think one thing I've learned is that I don't think I've ever had an experience where I've asked, you know, a more senior or more experienced person in my company for some help and some guidance, and come away from it feeling stupid or embarrassed, or like that wasn't helpful, or like I shouldn't have done it. So I think, yeah, that kind of not being afraid to ask people for help and just sound things out. And even when I did, I did some really stupid things, well, not stupid things earlier in my career, but when I was moving around, I handled it very badly, moving between departments and understand, like, trying to work out how to tread that line of talking to my current boss about the fact that I wanted to move into a different role or something like that. I was scared of it, so I just didn't do it. But actually, even then, they didn't hate me. They understood it. They thought it was a good move for my career, and we remained very close and very good friends, kind of personally and professionally. So I think it's about not being scared about talking to people. And then for me, more recently, the huge decision in my career and my life really has been starting a family, and trying to do both. Having a Formula One career and a family was huge, and it was scary for me because there aren't that many role models for me to look at, and a lot of the men in the industry that I have seen become fathers just about take their 2 weeks paternity leave and then they're back at it, and you wouldn't really know about it apart from a few tea break discussions about a lack of sleep. And that I knew that was never going to be the world for me. My husband's a doctor, so he has a very demanding job as well, and so if I was going to do this, then I was going to be the kind of person that is not necessarily coming back 5 days a week, who is away for a year on leave and is having to leave the office at 4:30 to go and collect their child from nursery and things like that. I still found it scary, and I still didn't quite believe that it would necessarily work out when I went off and did it. But luckily, the relationships that I built up in the team gave me the confidence to talk about it and not feel like I was going to get judged or that it was going to be a problem for my career, to kind of explore what that might look like and then have the confidence to try it. But yeah, so I think it's that bravery to ask the questions is the key for me.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I think at the very beginning of my career, it's almost really easy to ask questions because you're not expected to know the answer. My concern now is I'm kind of in that period where I'm becoming experienced and still having the confidence to be able to ask those questions, ones that you think maybe they'll think I should know the answer, or maybe they'll think it's a stupid question in the first place. It's good to know that a brilliant engineer such as yourself still has the ability to and still feels confident and be able to say, look, I need some guidance, I don't know the answer. And so I think that's really reassuring for me personally, but I think a lot of people will find that as well.
Yeah, I hope so. The other really kind of, whenever I'm talking to people about kind of career progression and things like that, the most important question to me, and the one that I want everyone to think about and have an answer to, is what do you enjoy doing and what's important to you? Because I, particularly in my role now, I come across a lot of people, whether they're school, A levels, university, who are like, oh, I want your job, I want to be head of strategy or something. And that's great. And I'm not saying having a clear aspiration and a goal is a bad thing. It's absolutely not. But what my first question is always why, and I think if you can be guided in your career by saying, these are the things that I really enjoy, and these are the things that I really value. And maybe you value being in a really competitive environment, or maybe you value having a great work-life balance, or being able to work from home, and maybe you enjoy the stuff you're good at, or maybe you enjoy the stuff that you find really interesting, or you can see the social value of it. It really doesn't matter, and there's no right answer because it's about you. But if you know that, then that's way more powerful than having a job title, because then you can start exploring stuff. You can start asking people about their job and their roles and what it really involves, to start saying, actually, yeah, that I could imagine that aligning with what I enjoy and what I want in the future. So that's why I'm going to go in that direction, rather than just looking in my industry at the TV and seeing, like, I don't know, someone sat on the pit wall and saying, that looks amazing, I want to be that person, or hearing Bono talking to Lewis and saying, that's amazing, I'm going to be a race engineer. That's not a reason to chase it. The reason to chase it is to think about what's going to get you up in the morning 20 years into your career, and then starting to understand, how you get there.
That's awesome. So obviously I completely agree, you need to look at all the things that you'd enjoy and why you justify, yeah, that's why I do the job, but also you have to think about the things that are hard with that as well. And I think a key one probably for the technology industry, like engineering in general, but specifically for F1 is traveling. You are, or the team is, at a different site around the world every 1 or 2 weeks. So obviously that can have a very, very big, very big impact on your life. So have you personally found that was ever something hard to grasp or tackle? And has that changed recently with you having your child, or kind of what impact has that had on your career throughout you going through it?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, I've never been someone who is a big fan of the traveling aspect. Like, I don't mind it a bit, but I really value being able to get home and sit on my sofa and then go to sleep in my bed. And I don't really find myself able to relax when I'm in hotels or away with other people the whole time. I think I need to be in my own environment and around my own family to really relax properly. And so that has impacted my career choices. It's not only did it, mean that quite early on I decided there were certain routes that weren't going to be right for me. For example, trying to become a race engineer. It wouldn't have been right for a number of reasons, but one of the big ones was the traveling, because you can't get away from that. And one of the things I loved about strategy was the fact that actually you can be so involved in the races and so at the coalface without having to live out of a suitcase in a hotel room the whole time. So it has impacted my career, and there were times where I was quite worried that it may be quite negative. It may limit my ability to become head of strategy, for example, if I'm not the one that's traveling around the world and on the pit wall. But again, what I found was being true to my values and knowing what would work or wouldn't work for me was scary at times, but it's the right thing to do. And actually, my team really respected that, and we've actually built something which works for all of us. I think when it comes to traveling, then it's all about, or anything, because I don't travel, but I did used to work every single race weekend. So sometimes that means working Australia hours in the UK, and you do get home to your own bed, but at very weird times of day and stuff. And I think what's key is finding ways to kind of have a routine that works for you. So a lot of the race team that travel, it's about exercise, because you can always go for a run or find a gym, whether you're in Mexico or Austria or anywhere, but finding ways to kind of have a bit of a routine and have an unwind, I think, is really important, both traveling or just when you're doing really demanding things, because you can't focus on anything 100% of the time, all day, every day.
Absolutely. Awesome.
I found it really inspiring that you said that despite having no sort of like role models that worked in the same sort of career as you, that had children and a family, you still went ahead and made that huge decision. So since you became a parent, we said that obviously you opened up that stream of conversation with the people around you and your managers, and just kind of had that open space to speak to people and communicate how you're really feeling. Was there any other way that your approach changed to well-being and like managing your mental health at work after you became a parent? Or
yeah, I think there's two things that I've really noticed change. The first I've already touched on before, where I have these kind of really rigid boundaries now, which I'm not sure if I'd have ever been able to have trying to artificially create them for myself, but they've been so positive. because now I know exactly how much time I've got to do work each day. And I can be really focused and really ruthless at making sure that when I'm working, I'm doing the most useful stuff possible and getting as much done as I can. But when it's time for me to go, I go, because I can't leave my son, waiting for me. And when I get home, I can't be thinking about work and focused on work, because I've got a toddler charging around the house who needs my attention. So that I thought was going to be a negative, but it's actually been a huge positive for me. And I think it's really helped make me more kind of balanced. The other thing I've noticed is that it's made me much more aware of other people. So yes, I've had more conversations about me and about my needs and stuff at work, but it's also opened up a lot of other, mostly the junior female engineers in my company, kind of talking to me and maybe sharing some of their concerns and getting some of my input, which is something which I didn't do enough of. And I don't know how much of it was that there wasn't the person to talk to there, and how much of it was just that I didn't put myself out there. But the value of it, I've just been amazed, and what I learned from it as well, talking to other people is brilliant. But more broadly, away from just the kind of decision to maybe become a mother as an engineer, it's really showed me the power of being able to share experiences, being able to find those safe environments with the right people where you can be really open and share both with people who can understand the personal and the professional side of things, because I think it's probably the most powerful tool for managing kind of well-being and mental health, is getting out of your own head and getting other perspectives.
Yeah, definitely. So as you progress in your career and you move on to job roles like head of strategy, which I can imagine is really stressful and demanding, what do you do in your spare time to get that time out and make sure that you do, because it sounds like you're really good at getting that separation now after starting a family, and like you have those boundaries. So what is it that you do to look after your well-being or as a hobby in your free time?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I find the most important thing for looking after my well-being is being outside and being active. So now that's mostly going on walks with my toddler and finding animals and and things. But in the past, it was always mountain biking and climbing, really being out in the mountains, just away from everything, and getting really tired, but switching off probably a bit more mentally was the key for me. And I could always tell that, if I was feeling a bit down or a bit low, then I often wouldn't really have the motivation to go out. But if I just, if I could just convince myself to go for a 15-minute run, it would normally turn into a much longer run than that. And I would end up feeling so much better off the other side of it.
So maybe this will end up being a very similar answer to the question that Minor just asked, but I think in this industry, there can always be negative atmospheres in a professional team, and that can have an impact on our mental health and well-being. I think even more so in an industry that is a sport like Formula One, there can be extremely high highs, but also there can be disappointing periods as well, where maybe you didn't achieve or get to where you thought you were going to. So if you've been on a run of poor form in F1 for Mercedes, what do you do personally to manage that and keep yourself kind of focused and on a good beat? But also, is there something that as a team you do as well to kind of refocus and think, okay, let's go on to the next challenge?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right, and in Formula One as an industry, you fail far more often than you succeed. If you look at races, then only one team out of 10 can win any race. And if you look at aerodynamics, for example, if you're putting parts in the wind tunnel, like 9 out of 10 times it won't make the car better and it will just go in the bin. Like failure is the norm, really. But what's great, I'd say, about the sport and about it is that you're a team, and generally you're not failing and struggling on your own. You're doing it with a group of people. So one thing I've often done, and I think has always worked very well, is getting away from the office with my team. You know, if we've just had a rubbish race, for example, or something, just going out for lunch or heading to the pub after work or something can be a really nice way of kind of just unwinding and moving on. And sometimes, you know, you talk about the, you know, the disappointment and have a little bit of time where you can all kind of wallow together. Sometimes you just end up talking about something completely different. But I think unwinding with a group of people is quite nice, rather than, you know, trying to go out with your mates from some other industry and feeling like you're the one bringing the group down and sulking in the corner. You know, kind of getting out together and just reminding yourself that you're not on your own is good. And then the other key for me is that almost every disappointment is an incredible learning opportunity. So I'll always make sure that we spend time analysing. And if you take races, for example, sometimes we'll have a rubbish result because of something that was completely out of our control as strategists. You know, the car broke down or the driver crashed or something. But we can often point to things that we did well. You know, okay, we didn't get the result we wanted, but look, you know, look at these brilliant things that we did do that we need to keep doing as a team, and we can celebrate that. Equally, there's always stuff we can learn, and often the most disappointing races are the races where we learn the most. And that means that it's almost a positive for me, because you can go into the next race really confident that you've learned from something, you've become better as a team, and you're not going to make the same mistakes again, even if it is just learning what not to do. The same as an aerodynamics designer, you know, every part that doesn't make the car faster, you can understand why, and that may well help you come up with, you know, with the key bits that will then make the car go faster. And once you see it as a learning opportunity rather than a mistake or a failure, then actually it can be really positive, because almost the more you fall, the more there is to learn. And so the more positives you can take out of it.
Yeah, and I bet that kind of understanding and learning opportunity, you've developed that over time. I'm sure the first time you failed, I know personally, you take it a lot harder, and you don't necessarily think, oh, what can I take away from this? So maybe a slightly different type of question, but if you were to go back to your younger self, just leaving university, with the thought of well-being and mental health and kind of managing kind of that throughout your career, would you tell yourself something different based on the route that you've taken, or actually are you pretty happy with what you've done, what you've learned, and the decisions you've made?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of kind of overall career path and route, I'm pretty happy, and I think the approach of just focusing on, you know, what do I enjoy right now, what am I getting value from, where can I add the value, and therefore what's my next move going to be, has worked really well for me. I think the biggest thing I'd try and tell my younger self is that the sooner you can set up really healthy and sustainable like work-life balance and practices, the better, because it doesn't matter whether you're the most junior or the most senior person in the company. It can feel like all eyes are on you and everyone's noticing how much you're there, but actually that's not what they're seeing. What they're seeing is your attitude. They're seeing what you're producing and the ideas you're coming up with. And so if you can start to form some really great habits, and whether that's making sure that you always go out for a run in your lunch break, or making sure that you always finish on time on the evenings where you've made plans to go and do something, you know, for yourself afterwards. All of those habits in terms of where you let work compromise the rest of your life, where you allow flex, where you don't, and what you do, once you form them, they're so strong, which means that setting them up early is the best way to go, because it's so much scarier having spent 4 years of like just working and doing nothing apart from focusing on your career, and then going, right, okay, but now have I got the confidence to kind of wind that back and let the rest of my life take over a bit? Or is that gonna, or is everything I've built gonna tumble down around me? Now it's not, but it feels like that. Whereas if you can go from the outset of saying, it doesn't matter whether I'm the most junior at the start of my career or just about to retire, having a work-life balance which is healthy and is working for me, and where I'm prioritizing the right things in my life is the most important thing. And if you start doing that from the start, then it just keeps going.
Thank you.
Well, looking to the future now, rather than your younger self, we know that F1 is like an ever-changing industry, and it's very fast-paced, as it's competitive, and it's such a dynamic career to be a part of. So what's one thing that you're quite excited for in the next 3 to 5 years in the sport industry side of F1?
Well, I guess the thing that I find probably most exciting about F1 is that no year is ever the same. And both externally, it's always changing. You've got different rules, you've got different teams coming to the fore or dropping back. But also internally, whether it's that we've got new people or a new team structure or new technology and techniques that we're developing, there's always something new. So even though I've been involved in it for 14 years, I've never felt bored or like maybe I'm getting to the end of the kind of my time and my enjoyment in Formula One. So I don't really have anything like specific of like this thing's going to be amazing and I'm really looking forward to it. But I'm just excited because I know that each year's going to be different. I think, next year it's going to be, for me, it's going to be about seeing how quickly we can bounce back from a disappointing year as Mercedes. And I've got a pretty young and new team, so I'm really excited to see how all those people kind of develop and evolve over the next 3 years, and what the team looks like and the crazy stuff we're up to. But yeah, so
we like to ask our guests a little bit of a different type of question on Talking Together. So this time it is, if you could compare your career so far to a racetrack on the F1 race calendar, which one would you choose and why?
Oh, I hate this kind of question. I'm so bad at these kind of questions. But maybe like Suzuka or something. Like, it's really technically challenging. It's pretty varied, and it's never really boring.
Great answer.
Pretty well, yeah.
I appreciate those questions. Are great ones for us to ask, but you probably get them all the time. You're thinking, not again. But no, that's been really, really good. So thank you so much, Rosie, for joining us today for this IMechE Talking Together interview. We really appreciated the last 45 minutes of interview we just had. I think it's been really insightful. I think a lot of people take things away. I personally certainly have, and I'm sure Manor has as well. I think this is an excellent start to the Talking Together collaboration with Formula Student this year as well. I think for me personally, I have an interest from that side of things. I think being able to get people from Formula Student seeing something I would argue is a lot more relevant to them, you being from F1, it would be something that they'll take a lot from as well. If you have found this interview interesting and want to be engaged with similar content, then please follow the link in the Talking Together website in the bio below. But I think from me and Manor, thank you so much for your time. It's been really, really fantastic talking to you, and take care.